Good morning, dear students. How are you? Hopefully, you will be fine. Today, I am going to teach you about the alphabets. Alphabets and their sounds. You will have to recognize the alphabets and how you can sound them. If you are going to take admission in a school, then you will have to recognize the alphabets and you will have to know about the sounds of alphabets to get admission in a very good and standardized institute. So let's start from alphabet A. The sound of A is apple. A says apple. A says ant. A says X. You can use A sound in different ways, and sometimes it sounds like A and sometimes it sounds like A. For example, in table, you can see that in table, if you omit the first letter T, it becomes able, A-B-L-E, able, and if we put the T again together, then it will become table. So, A has two sounds, A and A. Now we have to move on towards next letter, that is B. B says ball. B says box. B says bell. The sound of B is B. It's not ba. You have to say b. B says b. Okay. Now we have to move on towards the next letter, C. The letter C creates the sound of k. C says cat. C says camel. C says carrot. And the sound of C is k. C says camel. Now we have to understand and we have to recognize the next letter, that is D. D says D. D says doll. D says drum. D says okay, duck. You have to recognize this letter and you have to know about the sound of this letter properly and perfectly. Now I am moving towards letter E. Now we have to start letter E. The sound of E is A. E says egg. E says elephant. E says elegant. You have to use the proper sound and you have to recognize this letter properly and you have to practice this. Now the next letter is F. F says f. The sound of F is f. F says for fish. F says for flag. F says for frog. So you have to recognize this letter properly and try to remember its sound. F says f. Next letter is letter G. The sound of G is G. G says gate. G says girl. G says goat. You have to recognize all the sounds of all the letters and the recognition of these letters properly. Next letter is H. The sound of H is H. H says her hen. H says her hand. H says her head. So you have to remember this sound and recognize this letter properly. Next letter is letter I. The sound of I is E. Sometimes it has the sound of I. You can say that I has two sounds, I and E. In this type, you will have to example like that. I says igloo. I says iron. I says inkpot. Just like this, I is giving two sounds, I and E. Keep it in your mind and recognize this letter. Next letter is J. You have to sound it like J. J says jet. J says jacket. J says jug. The sound of J is J. Keep it in your mind and recognize this letter. Next letter is K. The sound of K is K. K says kite. K says cooking. K says K. You have to remember its sound and recognize this letter perfectly. The next letter is letter L. L says L. The sound of L is L. L says leg. L says like. L says lemon. You have to keep this sound in your mind and recognize this letter L. The next letter is letter M. M says M. The sound of M is M. M says monkey. M says mouth. M says man. You have to keep it in your mind and recognize this letter perfectly. The next letter is letter N. N says N. The sound of N is N. N says nose. N says nest. N says neck. Keep it in your mind and keep the sound of this letter in your mind and recognize it perfectly. Next letter is letter O. The sound of O is sometimes O and sometimes O. The sound of O is O. O says orange. O says ox. O says O. The next letter is letter P. Try to recognize this letter and try to practice its sound. P says P. The sound of P is P. P says pencil. P says pen. P says pink. Try to remember its sound and recognize this letter. Next letter is letter Q. Q says Q. Q says queen. Q says Q. Just like this, you have to keep it in your mind, its sound, and recognize this letter perfectly. The next letter is letter R. R says R. R says ring. R says rose. R says rest. Try to keep it in your mind, all the sounds of this letter, and recognize it perfectly. The next letter is letter S. S says S. S says sun. S says smell. S says smile. Keep it in your mind and try to practice and try to recognize this letter. The next letter is letter T. The sound of T is T. T says T tomato. T says T trunk. T says T telephone. Try to practice its sound and try to recognize this letter. The next letter is letter U. U has two different sounds like U and O. U says U, urine. U says umbrella. U says urgent. U says O. The sound of U is O and U. The next letter is letter V. The sound of V is V. V says van. V says vest. The sound of V is V. You have to keep it in your mind. The letter is W. The sound of W is V, just like V. W says V woman. W says V watch. W says V. The sound of W is V. The next letter is X. The sound of X is S. S. You have to keep it in your mind that the sound of X is X. X says X-ray. It has only one example right now. I am just explaining about this. And now we have to move on towards the next letter, the letter Y. Y has different sound. Y says Y. Y says york. Y says yo-yo. Y says y. You have to keep it in your mind. The next letter is letter Z. Z says the. The zebra. The sound of letter Z is Z. You can say just like zebra and just like zest, just like other words like that are becoming from Z. So you can say the sound of Z is Z. So now we have completed all of our letters and we have recognized all the letters and we have known about the different sounds of all these letters. You have to keep all these letters and these sounds of these letters in your mind and before going to take admission in a school or before visiting any institute where you are going to take admission. So my dear students, I'm just going to give you some instructions about this. Try to keep all these letters and all the sounds of these letters in your mind and try to keep it in your mind that all these alphabets are called letter. If you are saying about a single letter, then it's called a letter. This is not an alphabet. When we will call all these letters together, they will become alphabets. Okay, keep it in your mind that alphabets come all together, all the letters of ABC, you can say. But when we are going to talk about only one letter, only one spell, that is called a letter. Keep it in your mind. So best of luck to all of you. Try to recognize all these letters. Try to practice the sounds of these letters. And best of luck to you for your admissions, for your future studies, and for recognizing all these letters perfectly. See you in my next lecture. Till that time, take a lot of care of yourself and practice as much as you can because practice makes a man perfect. See you in my next video. Take care. Bye-bye.